who is seen as a bad guy in history, but was actually okay. Imhotep. Yes, the titular villain from The Mummy was a real guy, but he wasn't a soul-sucking killer who made off with the pharaoh's wife. In reality, he was a skilled architect and physician who designed the famous Saqqara step pyramid, which still stands today. Imhotep is even considered a father of Egyptian medicine, as he oversaw the healthcare of thousands of pyramid builders, and wrote a detailed papyrus manuscript that described different illnesses and their treatments. Even though he wasn't a pharaoh, he was given divining status after death due to his contributions. He was only one of 2 non-pharaohs to receive this title. Richard Jewell. He was an on-duty security guard during the '96 Summer Olympics and found a bomb. He notified authorities and helped evacuate people to safety. He was then accused of planting the bomb, even though it was Eric Rudolph who actually did it. William Murdoch was the guy who shoots 2 passengers and then himself in Titanic. In reality, while there were reports of an officer shooting 2 passengers and then committing suicide, there was nothing confirming it to have been Murdoch. In fact, Murdoch was in charge of launching lifeboats on the starboard side and had launched more than half of his fully loaded lifeboats before anyone else launched any. No one knows for sure what happened to him aside that he was lost with the ship. More so sports history, but the film Cinderella Man portrayed boxer Maximum Bayer as a murderous psychopath who gladly killed 2 fighters in the ring. In reality, he was personally devastated by these deaths. In the one he was most directly responsible for, he ended up giving his winnings from his next few fights to the fighter's family. Not really seen as much, but Claudius was a decent emperor. No, he wasn't quite Augustus, but if you compare him to the men who preceded and succeeded him, Gaius and Nero, he was a saint. Richard III of England is getting a better look. They say he was actually a good king, and that after he was deposed it was propaganda that ruined his name. Captain William Bligh of the HMS Bounty, portrayed as a monster in novels and films. He was actually a well thought of naval officer who, when forced off his ship, sailed a small craft 4,000 miles with minimal provisions. When there was no suitable craft available, he and his crew then built their own and sailed from East Timor back to England. He was exonerated by the courts and had a successful career as governor of New South Wales. Lucrezia Borgia wasn't actually as much of a villainous femme fatale as she was made out to be. I enjoy the character archetype, but she wasn't an example of one. Not quite history, but the Grim Reaper. Grim isn't killing you, he's just keeping you company. He's the buddy system. Also, people outside of Romania hate Vlad the Impaler, but in Romania, he's seen as a hero. Paul Rubens. For decades of my life I was under the impression that Pee Wee Herman was guilty of some child predator shit. But no, dude was just spotted in a porn theater. I don't think the masturbation claims were ever even substantiated, meaning he lost his career because he legally watched porn in his personal free time. Edit, typo. Edit, holy crap. That's my first ever gold. Thank you mightily, kind stranger. That guy from the B-movie, he was the only sane person tbh. Alfred Nobel. This is kind of a stretch but funny story. Before his death, a news publication accidentally printed his obituary and they basically blamed him for so much death and destruction, being the inventor of dynamite. So knowing what the world really thought about him and his legacy, he decided to have a newel written up describing the Nobel Prize, and he would give most of his fortune to that foundation to acknowledge and celebrate those who, during the preceding year, have conferred the greatest benefit to humankind. His surviving family only got to share 0.5% of his fortune. At the time of his death he owned 93 factories and about 30% of all patents in Sweden. So he would have been remembered as a bad guy, but that wake-up call changed him, his legacy, and the world. Not a real person, but Western media has sort of equated Hades with the Christian devil, which is very much not who he was in actual Greek mythology. In fact, He's actually one of the most sober and well behaved of the Greek gods. The only mischief he ever really gets up to is tricking Persephone into living with him. Otherwise he mostly kept to himself and did his job. Thomas Sankara. When he led Burkina Faso, it was probably the most progressive African nation at the time, and even by today's standards it would be up there when compared to them. He was also responsible for not only making it less reliant on France, but also its name, which used to be Upper Volta, and interestingly, since he was a guitarist, he also wrote the new national anthem. He was assassinated in 1987 after a coup. The play Mozart and Salieri, and later the film Amadeus, popularized the idea that Mozart's rival, Antonio Salieri, was a huge jerk who ultimately killed Mozart, but in reality there's no indication that Mozart was poisoned, or that Salieri had anything to do with his death. Also, Salieri was a philanthropist, and probably a lot more decent than theater/film made him out to be, when they needed an antagonist for Mozart. The lady who sued McDonald's for giving her third-degree burns. My bro Hades is the nicest man in all of Greek mythology. He's kind to his wife, doesn't cheat on her, and sure, he kidnapped her, but it was ordered he did. And Persephone really likes him, and they love each other. He's always held truth to people, never cheated someone on deals, and when some dude tried to bang his wife he tortured him for all of eternity. The man is a Chad. Hades. He did not. Pathologically cheat on his partner literally everyone have children with mortals Zeus do his job incorrectly try to assassinate his own children Hera Hades just sat around and did his job. The worst thing he did was kidnap his wife, and that's not exactly morally corrupt back then, and not even true in some stories. The captain of the Titanic. Cleopatra. A lot of historians for the longest time saw her as Augustus portrayed her, as an evil seductress, and ruined perfectly good romance. It was a lot more complicated, and she was a very smart, effective ruler. Was she perfect? No, no one is, but she isn't this monster people like to portray her as. Thankfully, this one is changing, which is good to hear. I hear that the guard from Titanic who shot a civilian, and then himself in the movie, actually helped board passengers into lifeboats until the ship took him down with it. There's a monument to him for his heroic actions in his hometown in, I think, Scotland or Ireland. Monica Lewinsky. Gonna leave it at that. Tom. He was just being a cat. Jerry, on the other hand, was a massive twat. Marie Antoinette. She was far from perfect, yes, but she was shipped away from home at 14 years old to a country that hated pretty much everything about her homeland, with an economy that was already starting to fray at the seams. Yes, she lived extravagantly, being literally the queen, and having to keep up appearances, but she was often falsely accused of major fuck-ups that she had nothing to do with. She never said, "Let them eat cake." She was impersonated and held responsible for one of the most expensive jewelry pieces in France's history. The people of France were never going to like her, and took every opportunity to hate her more. Edit. Some people are interpreting this as me thinking she was a great person. I don't know enough about her to have that kind of opinion. I'm just saying that she likely wasn't the heartless, hedonistic villain she's often made out to be. The Persian Empire gets a bad rap these days. Now make no mistake, the Persians were brutal imperialists and slave traders. But then so was every other empire at the time. The Persian Empire was actually one of the most diverse and culturally accepting empires in human history. Their standard policy of leadership was to allow cultures they took over to retain their own customs, their own laws, and even their own leaders. Provided they didn't rebel and paid their taxes on time, they more or less left you alone. Plus, all subjects got to benefit from the rich trade routes and the security of their armies. On average, Persian citizens, in particular women, enjoyed more rights than nearly any other empire of the time. So whilst I can understand not wanting to be conquered by them, compared to the alternatives, you could have done a lot worse. The Grinch. Khrushchev was actually the bigger man during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He initiated the negotiations and even let Kennedy look like the hero by keeping America's side of the bargain secret. Not to mention all the measures he took afterwards to prevent something like it from happening again. Cool runnings. The Swiss were kind and welcoming to the Jamaicans in bobsled. When the film came out, the Jamaicans felt bad for how distorted it made the Swiss to be smearing villains. I always learned that Hannibal, the great general, was a terrifying invading force for the Romans in my history class. The Romans were a terrifying invading force to literally everyone else, and kept slaves. Hannibal is only the bad guy if the Romans are good guys. Edit. I like a lot of the debate this has provoked. From my perspective, Rome painting Carthage as the bad guys was always like America saying Vietnamese communists were the bad guys. Maybe they have an agenda that's hostile towards yours, but good lord, it's pianos to peanuts, isn't it? History is written by the victors. If Britain had won, Benedict Arnold would be a hero. So, in 2000 years, what could we possibly know about these people besides what we Sherlock Holmes out of the ground? Squidward.